Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix. And I'm your host, Janet Lessin. And I'm here once again with Richard Knight, and we're going to continue on his story, which is fascinating. And this is episode 5, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Richard. Right, we're doing...
Good evening.
Number 5. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Janet. Good evening, our audience and our viewers out there, listeners, you know, because, I mean, when we hear something, we almost view it with our mind anyway, so it's almost like being on TV, only you're in the air instead of on a boob tube.
Yes. So, last time we were on, we have some overlap, and we're only going to do an hour show today, so we're going to kind of get right to it. So where do you want to begin?
Sure. Well, I think...
What was the next episode you liked?
If I remember the last time we were kind of trying to sum up things in the last few seconds of the show or whatever. Anyway, we were in New Orleans, and I had reached the age of 25, and I had decided that I'd go into the Army Reserve as a JAG specialist for the Judge Advocate General, which is the military judicial circuit and the judicial lawyers and all that kind of stuff for the military in regards to the Army. And this was brought about because it became kind of a personal challenge, because I wanted to see if, in fact, you know, I could compete with others, you know, 5 or 6 years younger than me. And then in turn, of course, I was feeling kind of overzealous because, you know, at 25, you feel like you're at the prime of your life, that you're invincible, that nothing, you know, bad can happen to you or anything like that. So anyway, I went into the Army Reserve, and I ended up going to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training. And while I was in basic training, I was called down to the captain's quarters, and I was told that there were some gentlemen there to interview me from the intelligence community of the military. And I said, well, this is really bizarre. I mean, what brought me to attention? And they just said, well, you know, you've had a very interesting life thus far, and there were some high points in your life that, you know, brought you to our interest. And so we're wondering if you might like to join us in that aspect of the service. And I said, well, basically speaking, I just need you to answer one question and one question alone. And they said, oh, what's that? And I said, well, when you're in the field, do you honestly know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is? And they said, well, in all honesty, not really. And I said, well, then that pretty much precludes the situation, because if you don't know who you're working with and who can be trusted, then I sure don't want to be thrown in the middle of the mix. I mean, even though I'm intuitive and telepathic, I still would not want to have to feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder or seeing that I'm spied on, or you know, somebody's hunting me down for some unknown reason or something like that. So I bowed out of that, and I kept on my course and ended up in JAG Corps. And, of course, I was stationed back in New Orleans, which was very convenient. Now, let's see. In addition to that, of course, as you might imagine, living in New Orleans, I'm constantly running around the French Quarter, and there's all kinds of different things going on and all kinds of sights to see, and just all kinds of people from all over the country and perhaps even all over the world at times. And, of course, they call it the city that time forgot because, and yes, indeed, it does seem that, you know, it's a city that time forgot. Anyway, the last big event, of course, had been with Muriel, and that was the big highlight from the last show that we had. Mm-hmm. So things had become not really mundane, but then, of course, we had St. Germain popping in. That was kind of a big event as well. And, of course, this woman appearing to become possessed and then not possessed, and then St. Germain showing up in all intent and purposes physical, although I'm sure it was his energetic body and not an actual corporeal one, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So anyway, And then we had the statue of Christ becoming animated and him getting all ticked off at the fact that Mary had been removed from the church. And I'm going, why, you know, why would someone so sublime as to have Christ consciousness and to be so close to God, why would in turn they become so being of, you know, not wanting a statue to be removed from a church? It just struck me as very odd. And if it hadn't been for the fact that Muriel was a witness to this, I would have definitely thought I was going bonkers for sure. But anyway.
And keep going,
Well, then in turn, we had an incident with a pair of male witches that happened to live next door, and they had sent this weird-looking green creature kind of thing through a mirror in my apartment, which the apartments had adjoining walls. They didn't actually have adjoining rooms or anything of that nature, but they had adjoining walls, and that was enough for the spells that they were casting to work. And, of course, when she was sent back to them and she ended up in their front living room closet, then, of course, I went out on the porch and basically using an obelisk that was Egyptian in character and stood about 8 foot tall, I pulled down lightning, and the lightning struck from the air directly down into the building and directly scorched the carpet that was directly between the two of them. So it was kind of like saying, hello, don't play with forces you don't really know enough about to be playing with. So anyway, yes, New Orleans has a tremendous amount of character. A whole lot goes on there spiritually, with the occult. And, of course, the word occult just means that is that which is hidden. So anytime you're speaking of anything that's occult, you're just basically referring to knowledge that is not publicly known or basically preferred or only transited from one person to another person under certain circumstances, under initiation or perhaps in private counsel in their own quarters and that kind of thing. So anyways, gone a ride with the reserve for 6 years. And at the same time, I became more or less officially involved with the Coptic Church of Egypt. And I met a couple of gentlemen, and one of them chose to be my mentor in regards to the Coptic faith or the Christian faith of the Egyptians. And of course, in turn, I was also taught a great many Egyptian mysteries, because there's a great deal of magic and mystery that hides behind the Coptic Church, as there is a great deal of magic and mystery that hides behind the Catholic Church and a number of other churches that I could readily point out. They have inner traditions as well as outer traditions. And, of course, the inner traditions are taught unto priests, and the outer traditions are what the people see when they come to church and the rites that are performed by the priests in front of them. One of probably the largest or most memorable events that I had was called the Little Death, and I was basically allowed to fast or commanded to fast for about 42 hours or so before entering a sense deprivation chamber. And the deprivation chamber was filled halfway with water, and of course it was pitch black inside, so once you entered, you no longer had your 5 senses. In other words, you lost all touch with physical right because the chamber itself was so black you couldn't see. The chamber was so encased that you couldn't hear. And, of course, on top of that, as though that's not enough, you're actually sloshing around in water, which, of course, brings back kind of a birthing effect or a birthing memory, because, you're in your mom's stomach, and hello, you're being gestated by your mom back when you were born physically. So that's what the chamber is basically to rebirth you, not only on a physical level, but more importantly on a spiritual level. And so that's why they call it the Little Death. So anyway,
sometimes they enhance that with entheogens. Were you doing it just by yourself, or were you doing anything enhanced like mushrooms or peyote or ayahuasca or
no,
any kind of sacred medicine?
No additional sacred medicine. Rather, it was a psychological state of being, and of course, there were lots of prayers that were chanted. So basically, when I went into the chamber, you could say I was in an elevated state of mind or an elevated state of being, and my focus was purely spiritual. So the same state that is induced by sacred medicines were in fact being induced by me, but on a spiritual level without the inducement of the medicines as well. So anyway, that was some very.
What did you achieve with that? Did you have any revelations, or what happened?
Well,
when you
I felt that I was called upon, to minister unto others, to continue counseling others from a spiritual aspect. I also felt that I was to under some very, very serious study, that lasted probably about 40,000 hours in about a 6-year period. And of course, it wasn't even completed entirely. There had been enough well, I want to say maybe 25,000 hours had been completed at the time that we jump on forward a little bit. And I want to say it was age 29 when I was actually ordained by the bishop, or rather actually the patriarch, because in actuality this man had been chased out of Egypt and his family had been slaughtered during the last Christian-Muslim wars that were being held in Egypt back in the 70s, okay? And his family had been slaughtered because they were being Christians. I think his dad was a doctor and his mother was some kind of a professor at one of the universities or something. And, of course, there's been an ongoing schism between, the Christians and the Muslims for thousands of years, because naturally we both recognize that there's one God, but at the same time, there's a far cry difference in regards to who was, on the Muslim side you had Muhammad, of course, and Muhammad was basically the voice of God unto the people. And of course on the Christian side you had Christ, and Christ was the voice of God to the people. So there's a lot of disharmony in regards to tradition and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, people can be very, very tunnel visioned and get very irate and very angry and very violent in actuality when it comes down to religious beliefs. And of course, there's been religious wars in the world for God only knows how many thousands of years. So anyway, I was ordained by phone by Anuba Shenuda, or Father Shenuda, who was basically the Pope of the Coptic Church at that time, while he was under house arrest in Egypt. Okay? And this is at the age of 29. Okay? Now, I'd already been ordained as a priest, an archpriest, a bishop, an archbishop, and a patriarch as far as our own stateside church was concerned. Okay? Because in addition to getting with Salvador, who was my teacher and my ordinator and so forth, we also had another guy that was our papal amanuensis, or basically our treasurer or money keeper, basically speaking. And the two of them, of course, had been most efficient in regards to, having me recite different rites and that kind of thing. And, of course, in addition to saying Mass in Coptic, I also learned to say Mass in Gaelic. So I was practicing, on one hand, the Christian rite as ordained by the Coptic Church, and the Christian rite as ordained by the Irish Church. So I would do Masses in Coptic, and I would do Masses in English, and I would also do Masses in Gaelic. So in the Gaelic, of course,
population be able to understand you in the different languages? What was the purpose of doing it in the different languages?
Yeah, the Coptic basically was for the few Egyptian-blooded individuals that we had that were in attendance to the church, which were not a great many, but you would be surprised. There was about 30 or 40 amongst the population in New Orleans, which is a very, very large city. So anyway. Now, the Irish population in New Orleans, again, we had probably, 50 or 60 people that were of Irish descent. And then, of course, we had an additional, say, 100, 120 people that in actuality were just generally Christian. But they were attracted to the church because the church appeared to be more personable than, the larger cathedrals and things of this nature. And so, and
so what
of course,
was the
a lot
basic
of them,
belief of the church? Like the basic philosophy?
Christianity, okay? Yeah. Coptic Orthodox is just like Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox. It's the Orthodox tradition of the Christian church. So it's an Orthodox church. And the Christian Orthodoxy is a little more liberal-minded than what you would call the Western church, which mainly consists of Catholicism. They include a few more books in the Bible than the Western church does. There's apocryphal texts that are recognized as being needed to be included in the Bible that were deliberately left out, thanks to St. James and thanks to the popes of Rome and various other scholars and so on and so forth, all with the idea of mainstreaming a certain message and not allowing anything that would divert anyone's attention from to the side of that message being delivered. So anyway, so yeah, I was of the Coptic faith, and eventually I did receive a degree from that was basically signed off on by my ordinator there at the church, and which I helped also found, of course, as well as a seminary. And the seminary and the church were basically in one building. We're not talking a huge place, you know what I'm talking about. We're just talking a rather small place that took maybe a half a block in length and size, and maybe, well, like a corner on the corner of a junction of two streets, and you run a half a block to the north and a half a block to the east, and that's where basically the church and the seminary sat. Okay, so it wasn't a huge place, you know, and it was basically on the outskirts of a neighborhood, so it wasn't really bothering anybody as far as residences were concerned, and it wasn't really in a business district. It was kind of out of the way from that aspect as well. So you could get there by, you know, taxi or whatever, you know. Of course, we had a minimal amount of parking, but we had a lot of on-street parking, so that were available,
now, did you
especially
live
during Sundays.
at the building? Did you live at that building, in that building?
Yes, we also had residences above where the church was. So we had a monastery, a seminary, and a church all combined in one place, basically speaking. Now, we did have an outbuilding where we also held various religious rites in private and so on and so forth, and somewhere you could go and basically spend hours and hours doing prayers and things of that nature. Okay, and that was very private, and it was basically secluded. You know, there were no windows, and what windows there were painted over, so you could not see inside, and that kind of thing. And it was like maybe a 12 by 12 room. It wasn't very large. Okay.
Now, did you perform marriages and do baptisms? Your church do baptisms?
We did do baptisms, and yes, we were open to performing marriages if one were requested. And we were also very, very good friends with the Greek Orthodox Diocese in New Orleans. Matter of fact, the Greek Orthodox Bishop, Thomas Baumler, at that time, was a very dear friend of mine, as well as being a criminal attorney. And so at times we would talk church, and at other times we'd talk legal investigations and legal matters and criminal matters, and all of this all over playing chess. And so we'd play chess for hours, and we'd have all these lengthy conversations. And he was a great guy. May he rest in peace, because he's been passed now for no telling exactly how long. But anyway, probably over 30 years anyway. So anyway, we just this was our thing, and you know, unfortunately, Salvador eventually fell down the steps, because we had a set of triple wooden steps that were up from the church grand hall, basically up to our living quarters, and unfortunately he fell, and when he fell, he tumbled down 2 flights of these stairs, and so, you know, he had to be hospitalized and so forth, and he sustained some serious injuries, which made him walk with a cane from that point forward. And of course, we brought it to the attention of Social Security, and fortunately, I don't know how it came about other than God's basically intervening, because he was awarded Social Security disability within 3 months, and basically that's unheard of.
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
So anyway, but I mean, in addition to the church, of course, I was working a mundane job outside of the church, and of course, we as a church had been fully established with the state of Louisiana, and of course, we were recognized as a church organization and so forth. But we were fighting tooth and nail to get our 501(c) clearance. And we never did actually, at least at that point when I left the church, which was back in '86, we never did actually receive our 501(c) to my knowledge. Now, it could well be that the church, of course, continued on even after my absence. And they may have eventually been successful in obtaining that nonprofit status. But anyway, so, you know, you have Mardi Gras, which of course is basically a period of the year It varies date-wise because, the calendar rotates and everything. And, of course, that's usually one grand week and a half where basically there's all kinds of parades and there's millions of people that come visit the city and there's all kinds of things going on and all this kind of thing. And basically anything you ever wanted to see and didn't expect to see, you would definitely see during Mardi Gras. So that was one of the big highlights of being in New Orleans. And then, of course, it concludes on Fat Tuesday, which is the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday in the Catholic calendar. Okay?
So what month is that? Like March or?
Well, it falls.
Mardi Gras coming
usually
up?
Usually falls in February for the most part, but it has been pushed into March, and it can be as early as January, just depending on how the calendar rolls and whether the crews are all together and have all their costumes and all the floats together and everything else in order to begin the parades. So it's kind of like the.
I wonder if they're doing
cruise.
it this year.
I don't know. I really don't know. That's a very good question. I would think probably not, simply because you're talking of millions of people coming into a city, and of course the 6-foot distancing would be out of the question in regards to parade attendance and that kind of thing. But I mean, I lived in the city for 10 years, and basically during the last 7 years thereabouts, I was attempting to leave the city, and every time I would get money to leave the city, the car would break down. So I'd have to invest the money to make the car repairs, and then I'd have to go back to work. So it was almost like the city was holding on to me or didn't want me to leave. And now, geologically,
go.
Exactly,
yeah.
Or geographically, I should say, if you were to draw a line from New Orleans directly over to Africa, you would find that the city that is sister to New Orleans is actually Cairo, Egypt. So my suddenly being in New Orleans and then suddenly getting tied up into an Egyptian church was kind of coincidental in a way. Lots of Egyptian influence.
So what they're doing this year,
influence.
just a little aside, they're not having Mardi Gras. People are decorating their houses like a float. So it's like a virtual Mardi Gras. And everybody's decorating their houses instead of having the parade. Interesting.
Well, that would make sense. Although we did have one year where Mardi Gras was officially canceled by the mayor, and even the police went on strike. And with the police on strike and Mardi Gras officially nixed, we had it anyway. And there were lots of parades and lots of floats and everything else. But, of course, this was long before the virus hit us all. Long before the pandemic ever came about. So, yes, I mean, now, of course, everybody's got to be careful because this stupid thing is hopefully on its deathbed, I would hope. But we never know, because it seems like every time things start turning around and start becoming more positive, all of a sudden it mutates and there's yet another outbreak of some other kind. It mutates into some other virus or some other form of the virus.
Right.
Starts affecting people negatively again.
That's what we're at right now.
Of course, now, once I had been ordained bishop in the Holy See of the United States, because at that time there were no other Coptic churches on the soil of the United States. So basically, Anuba Shenuda had given us succession to create a diocese, and then in turn, of course, there suddenly became a diocese in New York, and a diocese in Chicago, and a diocese in Los Angeles, and diocese in Miami, and dioceses all over the place. Because Father Shenuda...
That's probably why you had trouble getting your 501c3, because you were the first one.
Right.
They had to clear that category. Yeah.
Plus the fact that our relations with Egypt at the time were a bit strained as well. So, fortunately, I was granted a doctorate both in communion with the church and through the Coptic seminarial studies via the University of Cairo, Egypt. And fortunately, this degree and all that it took into making it, and the discipline and everything in earning it, was in fact recognized by the Army. And then the church came back and said, well, I'm sorry, but now that you're a bishop in the Holy Sees of the United States, you cannot be a member of anybody's military. So this came down, at the end of 4 years, and of course, at the age of 29, I had to basically write my own honorable discharge, and it was signed off by my colonel, and it was sent upstairs and came down ratified. And so basically my discharge was given me under honorable basis. So, of course, I still had 4 years. I had 4 years reserve enlistment. In other words, even though I was completely honorably discharged, in turn, I could still be called back for service on an emergency basis in the 4 years that followed. In other words, if there suddenly should be an act of war or something else, some other crisis break out, I would still be considered on the reserve list enough to be activated over time. Let's see here.
Okay, so I'm on our little chart here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you did this, you did the little death. Now, what else happened? Okay, I think we covered age 29. So what's the next significant thing that happens to you?
Well, I undertook what in magical circles is called the Great Work. Okay, there's been a book that's been around since the 70s. It's called the Magus or the Magus, Magus. Mm-hmm. All right, I don't recall off the top of my head who exactly the author is, and of course I'm not by any means taking any kind of liberal. I'm not going to make any quotes or any kind of presentation from the book itself, but basically it does describe a specific ritual that one undertakes in order to contact their holy guardian angel. Okay, and this includes fasting. It includes in being isolated where there's no contact with other human beings. It includes that you only ingest water for the most part and only take meals every 3 days. And this is to be observed at least 60 to 90 days. Okay? And, of course, there are garments that are supposed to be specifically made of fresh cloth and sigils that are to be drawn on the garments, and then in turn the garments freshly sewn, and then sigils put in different places along the walls. And, of course, the walls are to be decorated a specific color. And, of course, an altar is to be outlaid. And all this, and the instruments on the altar, such as a sword and a knife or a dagger and a staff to be anointed and blessed and all these kind of things. And basically, even a mitre is worn similar to the one that the Pope wears, except, of course, instead of having, St. Peter depicted on it and all this gold and embossed in brazier and all this kind of stuff, gold thread is used, but it is used to display angels and angelic script and so on and so forth. And so basically you go through all kinds of rituals and chants and so forth. And at the end of once the rites have been and the fasting and everything have been completed, then of course you wait patiently, hopefully in hopes of the arrival of your holy guardian angel. Well, in my instance, from the south, St. Michael, also known as Archangel Michael, walked through the south wall of the building and stood in my presence in full armor with his flaming sword and his spear in the other hand. And he looks at me and he says, "Aha, well, I have heard you call, and I'm sure that up until this point you had no idea that I have been appointed to be your guardian angel." And I said, "No, I had no idea whatsoever." And he says, "Well, not only am I your guardian angel, but you are now a member and have been a member of my army for a very long time." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, this is all very interesting, And he says, "Well, I've been looking over your life, and for the most part, you've always interacted in people's benefits, and you've always shown up when you needed to show up, and you did what was necessary, and then you pretty much vanished, similar to what I do myself. But now, of course, I grant you a flaming sword." And I'm saying, "Oh, my God, what are you talking about?" He says, "Yeah, well, you're a member of my army, so it's a crucial thing that you have this flaming sword, because the flaming sword automatically banishes all wicked and evil beings and all darkness from any particular situation or circumstance or what have you." And I'm saying, "Oh, okay then." And so he grants me this flaming sword, and of course the sword is in the sheath, and of course, like a dummy out of curiosity, of course I had to draw up the sword, and yes, it was indeed a golden flaming sword. And I quickly put it back in the sheath and basically dropped it because I was scared shitless. And I'm saying, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do with this? And he says, well, you'll know when you are called upon and when and how it is to be used, and that is only when you are to use it. So therefore, I suggest very sternly that you sequester it away, never to be used until called upon to do so. And I said, oh, okay then.
Good advice.
So I sequestered it away, and it's been sequestered away ever since. And fortunately, to date, I have never actually been called upon to use such a sword. All right?
Do you have this sword?
Is it
a physical sword, or was it a
I will
spiritual
neither
sword?
admit or deny it. Okay?
Okay.
It is both. It is both. It is such a sword that can be called forth that actually it remains in the spiritual realm, but actually called forth with special incantations, vibrations, and frequencies. It actually will manifest physically. So, fortunately, I have never had to manifest it physically all the way. Other than that one day, of course, it was given to me. Well, preferably not. You know, I mean, I'm very, very astute and very initiated in a lot of arcane arts, and therefore, I am well aware of how to do all kinds of rites and so forth without necessarily having to have a flaming sword. So,
it sounds Star Warsian.
Yeah, sort of, kind of. You know, Star Wars is before the Jedi Knights were invented, and before the Jedi sword or whatever come about. Although, of course, since then, as far as I know, actually they have created what you would call a laser sword, and it is under development by our government to be utilized in the necessity that war becomes about. As far as I know, of course, this was back in the 90s, so I would imagine now at the passage of another 30 years, I'm sure they've perfected it by now, no doubt. So yes, what you see in Star Wars may not be all that much Hollywood. In actuality, there could be some very serious substance to it. Not that I've ever attempted to acquire one, mind you.
I had St. Michael come to me in a dream. I had St. Michael come to me one time in a dream. Now, he was not in his warrior, he was soft and angelic and not in his warrior mode. Because he was coming for a different reason. But he said he came and said he was my guardian angel as well. So, and that was totally unexpected. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't doing any rituals. I was distraught because I'd been told I was told I was going to die, 6 months because I had lung disease. And he came and he said, "Nah, you're not gonna die. We're gonna fix you." So, now he didn't do the actual healing then, but he set the course of my life so that I came to where I was to get the healing, and so I would have died back in 1989 or 90. Yeah, what year was this that Michael came to you?
Let's see. I was 31, so that would have been around. Let's see. Okay, actually around 85, I guess, somewhere in there.
Right. Yeah, he came a little bit later.
Right before I departed. But of course, Michael is one of those that well, of course, he can appear 1,000 places at any one given moment. And of course, he can minister under millions if need be. And of course, that's just part of his authority or whatever.
Did you have any kind of relationship before then, or you weren't aware until he showed up that you had a relationship?
I was not. I was not aware that. Yes, I was not aware of that particular relationship between us until he showed up. But yes, I had actually seen him probably a half a dozen occasions beforehand, and of course had called upon him for assistance in various situations to act not only on my behalf, but to act on the behalf of others. So, but I had no idea that I was a member of his army, and of course I had absolutely no idea that he was my guardian angel. But see, you can,
and that's the same
like
thing
guides,
that happened to me. I had no awareness of him. I had never called on him for anything, never prayed to him, nothing. This all of a sudden he's like in my house, in my bedroom,
out of the blue,
and he's telling me you're going to be okay. You're not going to die, even though a doctor, when doctors tell you things, you kind of go, oh, that's kind of it, right? So I had resigned to, I guess I'm going to be dead soon. That he said, nope, that's not going to happen. Wow. So
Yeah.
Is he still? Has he come around since then? Has he appeared again?
Oh yeah, he's appeared about 4 or 5 times since then. Usually just basically to answer questions, and usually not in his full armor. There have been a couple situations where people were making claims that they were actually very close to him and members of his army or knew him very well, and at times he would appear, maybe for 5 or 10 seconds, just enough to say that, no, I don't know these folks, so what they're claiming, beware, and then just, boom, vanish. And different things of this nature. But that was the only time that I'd actually done a full-blown ritual, and of course I had no idea whatsoever at the time that I was doing it that he was going to be the one to show up. But I would also go as far as to say that we have many guides, and we could well have multiple guardian angels as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right? Because I know for a fact that we all have a healing team, and our healing team consists of not only angels and archangels, but also ascended masters and other enlightened beings that have basically been watching over us all of our lives. And all we have to do is call forth aid, basically, just humbly we say, hey, hello, I need some help down here. And boom, as soon as you put the call out, as soon as you ask for help specifically, they in turn will react to you and actually, intercede on your behalf or assist you within whatever way it happens to be that you need assisting with. So, anyways.
So on to age 31. What happened when you were 31? Unless there's anything else when you were 30. Did anything else, as a consequence of him showing up in this ritual, what else happened?
Well, of course, I basically, the way in which I left New Orleans was basically to get a company transfer from New Orleans to Charleston, South Carolina. And that was actually the only way in which I left New Orleans, because all of my previous trials had, in attempts, to leave the city, had been completely bushwhacked. So I did get a company transfer because I had been transferred up to a management position, and I was working with a cold storage company that also did USDA inspections. And so it was with the inspection service in which I was made a manager, and then I was transferred to Charleston, South Carolina. And over there I bought my house, my first house, and basically resided there for about 3 years. And while I was in Charleston, of course, I began working for attorneys and judges, and along with the police department and along with the sheriff's department, but only as a consult. In other words, if I had a matter that looked like it would be fall into the mainstream of law enforcement, then of course I would basically go to them and say, hey, look, I've investigated this case, and this is what I found, and these are all the statutes and maybe the crimes that have been committed or about to be committed, and y'all can handle it from here. And of course, it got so they almost wanted to shut the door on me because they didn't really like when they saw me coming, simply because I would lay out so much evidence and everything else, they couldn't very well turn their back on it, so they would have to take action on it. So they'd see me as, oh no, here comes Knight again with some more work.
So to what degree did you call upon your psychic abilities to make this stuff happen?
Well,
was this all 3D reality, or were you utilizing your abilities that you have?
I mean, as far as investigations are concerned, I cheated all the time. I mean, I would read minds. I would know where people were going to go before they got there so that I could be there in advance. I would know instinctually if things were about to go south and there'd be gunplay or something like that, so that I could get myself out of harm's way and I could clear other individuals out of harm's way. And then, of course, notify the police in advance enough that they were arriving on the scene just as, people were going wild or what have you, so that in turn they could protect the innocents. So I used my abilities a good deal in that regards, in the protection of other people. And of course, in Charleston, like I said, I worked I came upon a most interesting job, and that was Director of Security for the Charleston Naval Hospital. And I had 28 officers under my supervision, and it was an 8-story hospital, and it had approximately 2.5 acres of property, and they had bungalows at the back of the property, and they had also a drive-up pharmacy on the property as well. So in addition to the 8-story building, which had lots and lots of wards, including a psych ward on the 5th floor, as well as an ER and all this kind of stuff, and we were not only dealing with naval personnel, but we were also dealing with their loved ones and, their family members and so on and so forth, and occasionally the riffraff that would come into the hospital off the streets. So eventually that was put to an end because we decided that we needed to become more secure, and I was trained by the Naval Criminal Investigations Division in anti-terrorist techniques and so forth, and how to rally the hospital to do triage and this kind of things if say, for example, we were to come over under some kind of a terrorist attack or find ourselves in the midst of war on our own shores. So that was all very interesting. And then I was offered another job, and of course this is going down the road a bit now. We're talking, let's see, I want to say 1990. So this is passing. So I was basically 40 years old. No, let's see here, 45 years old. Okay. Now in the interim, of course, I had also completed an associate's degree in criminal justice, and I'd also been trained in murder investigation and forensic studies of crime scenes and so forth by the Charleston Police Department as a part of my advanced criminal justice studies. Okay, and that all transpired in Charleston while I was taking, because I had started my degree, I want to say in '87, and I finished my degree in late '89. So I had my associates in criminal justice. And the funny thing is, looking back over it all, I have done things absolutely backwards. I mean, granted, I became a minister at the age of 19, and I acquired my first doctoral degree at probably around 23 or so. Then in turn, my second doctorate in, the first one was in divinity, the second one was in theology, and the theologian one was basically at about 29 or 30, 29, somewhere in there anyway. And then, of course, I started to basically attempt to go into the regular field of criminal justice from an educational standpoint because, I've been working it all my life, basically since age 19 up till then. So I went ahead and got my associates, and then I ended up coming over here to Georgia because I was picked up by Department of Justice, and I worked as an immigration inspector stationed in Savannah, Georgia, and I'd left Charleston in '90, so I would have been 45 at the time, and I came on board with Department of Justice, and I worked for them for 4 years, and so I would have been, let's see.
Wait, we had 35. With 35, you went to Savannah.
Right.
In the Naval Hospital. 39, that's the Department of Justice.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I worked from for the Department of Justice basically long before Homeland Security had ever been invented. So it was purely Department of Justice, and the immigration inspectors and the like had a great deal of legal leeway in probably less of a sense nowadays, because nowadays they're under Homeland Security. Because there's the immigration and customs as far as ICE is concerned, which is the legal branch of customs as far as getting smugglers and all that kind of stuff, and collecting contraband and all this kind of stuff, which had been going on previously. It just, ICE was under the umbrella of Treasury because that's who customs was working for at the time. Then, of course, when 9/11 happened and Homeland Security got invented, within a year's time, they had both immigration and customs under their umbrella. So, anyway, but I mean, yeah, if ever we were going to have an agency or a organization that would have been similar to what Nazis would have called the Black Hand, or the inside persons that would have basically gone around and collected subversives and then in turn encamped them or jailed them or whatever and done away with them eventually, which is what exactly they did, the SS. But anyway, on this end, immigration basically would have a person come before me, and basically it would be, they would want to enter the country, and of course I would basically look at their passport, validate that their passport was legal and everything was up to snuff, and there was nothing contrived and nothing that looked like it had been forged or anything of that nature. Well, then I would turn to my computer, and all I would have to do is hit one button, and it pulled in 16 different federal agencies, and within less than 3 minutes, I knew this person's whole background as far as the recent past. And, of course, whether in fact they had any criminal charges pending either internationally or on our own home turf and all that kind of thing. So anyway, if there was ever going to be an organization similar to the SS here in the United States, it would have been immigration at the time.
Immigration, right. Now,
because,
we're
we just
coming down, it's 2:47 for me, so we have about, 13 minutes left.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you on your little storyboard here, it said that you had an accident one dark and stormy night that you didn't report, you didn't go to the hospital, but it would raise its ugly head 3 years later. So
yes,
you resigned.
That's skipping forward quite a bit because
okay, so I will go forward again.
I left. Well, that's okay. I left immigration, and then I went private sector, and I was director of security, and then became director of safety for Ithaca Industries, which used to have 16 plants here in Georgia, 12 of them manufacturing plants and 4 distribution centers. And I used to be the safety officer for all of these plants and distribution centers, and I used to conduct OSHA inspections for the safety of and the welfare of the employees, as well as to put the management on task if there were serious safety situations that they needed to correct. So I did that up until let's see here, 96. Then I went here, landed in Valdosta, okay, where I currently reside at the moment, which is subject to change, and ended up going to the Valdosta State University and earned my bachelor's degree in criminal justice in 2000, and then went to work for the State Department of Juvenile Justice, which I worked for up until 2006. Well, it was a stormy night in 2003, okay, that I was actually on state business going between Tifton, which is where I was working out of at the time, all right, and drove west to Albany, which is about a 45-minute ride. Well, after I'd conducted my state business in Albany and was on the way back, there's a small town in between the two larger cities, and basically there is a cement bridge, all right? Now, it was pouring down rain, and I wasn't doing but maybe 35 miles an hour. But I was driving a Kia Sophia, which is a very, very lightweight car, and the water had basically stayed on top of the cement because unlike blacktop, it doesn't just cool off, it just stays right on the cement. Well, as soon as my front tires hit the cement, my car automatically started hydroplaning. And so I went into 360s, okay, and thank God was with me because no one hit me from behind, no one hit me from the opposing traffic lane, and all this kind of thing. And you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
My phone was just telling me I paid my bill. I paid bills.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Yeah.
So anyway, after the 360s, I ended up down in embankment, okay? And the only thing that stopped the car, which you can imagine, I'm sliding at an angle, like about a 90-degree, well, maybe not quite a 90, maybe a 70-degree angle, all right, on an embankment. And the front of the car is turned towards the highway above me, okay? And I'm sliding sideways down across this embankment. And the only thing that stopped the car was a telephone pole, okay?
Oh, my goodness.
Wow. It dented the back tire and dented the axle to a degree and all this kind of thing. And it's pouring down rain. And fortunately, I get rescued. But the long and short of it is, I never went to the hospital. I never reported this to work as an accident or anything like that. 3 years later, it come up, and I actually passed out at work. And that's when I went to see doctors and everything else. And everything was discovered that in actuality, I had 3 herniated discs in my neck. And I'm presuming this might have occurred the night of the accident. So anyway.
How are you walking around and not in excruciating pain all that time?
Well, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I was going to see a chiropractor, and I was getting cortisone injections in my neck, and I was, in the TEMS machine and all that kind of different things, but none of it was really working. And so then eventually my MD sent me to a neurologist, and he had an MRI done, and that's when they discovered the misaligned vertebrae and so forth. So anyway, I had neck surgery in 2005, okay? And basically, I had outshone and outdone my boss's boss, and as a result of that, he put a target on me about it. And basically, so I resigned under medical conditions, basically speaking. So I was with the department for about another 6 months, and then I left them, and that was in 2006.
Wow.
So by 2006, of course, I am, 51 years old.
So you kind of took a break from the real kind of woo-woo metaphysical paranormal stuff for a long time, but it never goes away from you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was still seeing spirits. I was still communing with spirits and talking to spirits. The supernatural happenings would occur, but to a much lesser extent. In other words, nothing really earth-shattering or anything of that nature. Just odd things, like just, I don't know, peculiar things, more or less, would happen on occasion. Like, who's going to be on the other end of the phone before it rings, and you already, you're going to get a certain piece of mail in the mail before it arrives. You go to meet someone, and all of a sudden you have like a deja vu moment. Well, wait a minute, have I seen this person before in a dream? And now all of a sudden here they are physically in front of me. Right. And of course there were interims, where I was being called away to clear a house, where there was a spiritual presence that needed to be set packing or whatever, because it was scaring, say, a 7 or 8 year old child in their bedroom, so they needed to go back to where they came from and so forth. And other situations, most of them were not necessarily that evil. You see what I'm saying? They were more mundane, right, with just annoying circumstances and that kind of thing that you could easily take care of in just a few minutes' time, rather than something that was really significant that you had to deal with, for 2 or 3 days. So no, it's never gone away from me. And I'm very blessed, and of course I'm very thankful for all of my gifts, and I do believe that my gifts have basically expanded over time. So I'm no longer.
What led you at age 50 to get your additional doctorate in religious science and metaphysics? Because you had been doing kind of criminal justice, and all of a sudden you're back to.
Well, that's because, you see, I basically put a capper on criminal justice when I had gotten my master's degree in criminal justice online and graduated in 2008, had been working at an Air Force base here locally as frontline security, and then was selected by another organization to go overseas in Kuwait. And I was working frontline security in Kuwait for a year. And this allowed me, during the break of 6 months interim, to tour Europe for a couple of weeks and then come back to Kuwait and work another 6 months and then in turn return to country. And it was because of the job in Kuwait, more so than anything else, that basically I could hardly find any work here at all. And my master's degree, unfortunately, really wasn't opening any doors either. So right. That's why I basically kind of settled down and I said, well, okay, I'm going to have to focus in some other perspective, and maybe I just need to get more back into my spirituality, which I had left alone only to maybe 30%, okay, in comparison to the 100% that it had before. So, I mean, since then, of course, present, I'm disabled and retired, and, life has been mundane for the most part. Not all the way around, but for the most part.
I can't imagine your life being mundane after all that. So you lived another. You're what, 65 right now, or
I'm 65
67.
currently.
You're 65, so you haven't. So we stopped at this episode at age 50, and we only have 4 more minutes. So what would you like to tell our listeners about what we're? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as far as timeline, I think this is a good stopping point, and I think our next show, I think our topic of discussion is basically who I am, where I come from, exactly why I'm here on Earth, and exactly what it is my intention to do now. Because, I'm a whole lot more consciously aware of a great many more things than I was back in those days, Especially, when you're talking your 20s and 30s, you're still seeking and looking and seeking and looking and researching and all this good kind of things. And it really doesn't hit you fully on cue until you actually get a bit older, and all of a sudden you start reflecting and you're looking back and you're saying, wow, at least I got away with a lot of things then that I wouldn't even attempt now. But more so, you become reflective and you say, well, what is it I really need to do next? And so basically, like, this is chapter 4 in my life, you could say. I've done this chapter over here and that chapter over there and this chapter over here and that chapter over there. And so now I'm at a precipice once again of saying, okay, what is it I see in my future? And this is what I'd like to share next, because, it skips over the mundanality of everyday life. Because, we all go through ups and downs, and we've all had hardships and all this other kind of thing. And yes, when facing hardships, our faith keeps us on cue and keeps us on tact and keeps us vibrant and alive for the most part, And I would rather not dig into anything that is really, really mundane to a deep, dark degree. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, I would enjoy an interview, in regards to that aspect.
Well, we will prepare that for next week. We're running out of time right now. Somebody joined us, and I'm sorry we don't have time to ask you a question, so join us again next week.
Oh, goodness.
So, so we'll be back at the same time next week, and we'll have a list of questions that we will ask Richard Knight. And if you listeners have any questions for Richard, please email them to me at aquarianradio@gmail.com, and you can look at the full page on this show at aquarianradio.com. So thank you, Rich, for coming, and we will see you again next week. Much love and blessings,
Thank you,
everybody.
Janet.
Thanks for joining us. Aloha.
Aloha, everybody. Good night.
Good night.